Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named Tales from the Loop. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first episode takes place in a highly technological small town where residents here study and grow. When they grow up, they become members of the local leading company called The Loop. In the soft morning light, a little girl named Loretta began another ordinary day. Loretta's mother, Alma, is a scientist absorbed in her research and doesn't have much time to spend with Loretta. Mature beyond her years, Loretta would often play alone after school, always curious about what secrets lay in her mother's underground laboratory. One day, when Loretta returned home, she heard her mother, Alma, arguing with a man. It turned out that Alma had stolen a dark core from Loop Corporation to complete her theory. The man urged Alma to return the dark core to the Loop Research Institute, warning that her little daughter could be implicated. However, Alma remained unmoved and eventually asked the man to leave. During dinner, Loretta asked Alma about the reason for the argument. Alma openly shared her experiment with the dark core. A science enthusiast, Alma envisioned a future where she and her daughter would work together at Loop. Loretta, on the other hand, just hoped to always be with her mother. The smiles returned to their faces. After dinner, Loretta danced joyfully to the music. Suddenly, for some reason, the circuit was disturbed, plunging the house into darkness. Calmly, Loretta walked to her mother's lab where the lights shone brightly, showing that Alma was experimenting with the dark core. Suddenly, the light dimmed and the window glass shattered, scaring Loretta, who quickly ran away. That night, Loretta dreamt of the dark core floating in mid-air, as if it were a premonition. When she woke up the next day, the broken window confirmed that last night's experiment was not a dream. Mature for her age, Loretta didn't disturb her mother. Instead, she placed hot water by the door, cleaned up the broken glass, and left. Loretta had scored high on yesterday's test. In this town, good grades are a ticket to the Loop Research Institute, meaning Loretta could be closer to her mother. Excitedly, she rushed to the institute with her test paper to show her mother. But Alma wasn't among the crowd leaving work. Thinking her mother had already gone home, Loretta ran to the house only to find it completely gone, replaced by a field of white snow and the dark core her mother had stolen. Loretta picked up the dark core, calling out for her mother in a panic. Suddenly, she heard a noise from afar. It was a boy named Cole who was throwing snowballs at robots in the woods. Loretta stopped him and continued searching for her mother. After they left, one robot's head suddenly twitched. For some reason, Cole felt a strange familiarity and closeness to Loretta and offered to help her find her mother. The two ventured into an abandoned house where it seemed snow was falling upwards, being sucked into the air. This reminded Loretta of her house, wondering if it had been taken away in the same manner. Confused and having lost both her mother and her home overnight, Loretta became a homeless little girl. Cole took her back to his home to seek help from adults. Coincidentally, Cole's mother, like Alma, was a scientist obsessed with her research and indifferent to her child. She harshly sent Cole away without listening to him. Helpless, Cole took Loretta to his room to play. As they passed by, Loretta noticed that Cole's father had a mechanical prosthetic arm. The two of them sought out Cole's brother, Jakob, to discuss their situation. Jakob was reading a science magazine and mentioned that stars can turn into black holes after they die. This reminded Loretta of her own home, possibly for the same reason, and she hurriedly left, frightened, to continue her search for her mother. She showed Cole the dark core, which floated in the air, defying gravity. As they walked, they began talking about their mothers. It turned out that Alma never let Loretta call her mom, which is why Loretta always used her first name. Cole also felt that his mother, who was absorbed in science, didn't love him. At that moment, Cole's mother was handling old items from a jewelry box, seemingly troubled by some unresolved issue, which was why she was so dedicated to her scientific career. Loretta brought Cole to the lakeside, and they bent down to listen to the sounds from the underground ring-shaped research facility. Loretta believed everything was connected to this facility. They went to the research center and asked security about Alma's whereabouts. Strangely, the guard made a call and said they couldn't find anyone by that name. Alma's name wasn't in the company's records. Loretta thought the guard was brushing her off and left angrily. After they left, the guard made a strange call to Cole's mom, saying a little girl was looking for her mother, Alma. Cole's mom was stunned by the news. She hung up and curled up in a corner, looking distressed. At that moment, the two arrived at the town's tavern. Loretta saw a figure that resembled her mother, but it turned out to be Cole's mom. Loretta broke free from her embrace and ran out of the tavern. Cole's mom stood there, stunned, as if she had seen something unbelievable. This was her first meeting with Loretta, but it seems that she had known Loretta before. Disappointed, Loretta threw a stone in frustration. She told Cole that if she ever had children, she would be a good mother and always be there for them. Cole, who also felt neglected by his mother, empathized and hugged Loretta. Back at Cole's house, Loretta wandered into Cole's mom's room to distract herself. She opened the collection box and found one of her own test papers inside. Loretta seemed to realize something and hurriedly asked the boy what his mom's real name was. Meanwhile, Cole's mom arrived at the empty lot where Loretta's house used to be. By then, she fully understood that Loretta was her younger self who had traveled through time. Cole's mom's real name was Loretta. She even remembered experiencing all of this, but at the time, she thought it was just a dream. On the other side, Loretta was terrified and ran to an abandoned cabin, planning to spend the night there. Cole's mom returned home to look for Loretta. The test paper spread out on the table confirmed her thoughts. Loretta was her younger self. Knowing what would happen next, the woman went directly to the abandoned cabin and found Loretta. In this extraordinary twist of fate, middle-aged Loretta met her younger self. Little Loretta understood the truth and immediately asked about her mother's whereabouts. Sadly, Cole's mom told her that Alma never returned. All these years, Cole's mom had devoted herself to science in a bid to find Alma, but she never succeeded. Loretta struggled to accept the truth and instinctively compared their nose bridges, which were identical, confirming they were the same person separated by decades. The woman comforted young Loretta, assuring her that she wouldn't be alone forever. When she grew up, she would meet a man, start a new family, and have 2 sons, living a very happy life. The woman explained that it took growing up to understand that Alma wasn't a perfect mother. Loretta mentioned that Cole had said something similar. This left the woman in a daze. Alma's neglect led to her disappearance, causing grown-up Loretta to obsess over finding her mother through science, leading to her neglect of her son Cole in turn. It was a cycle that needed to be broken. To break the cycle, Loretta needed to return to her original time. Having experienced all this, the woman knew what to do. She took her younger self's hand and led her to the center of the underground ring-shaped research facility that had always piqued Loretta's curiosity. A massive black sphere appeared before Loretta. This was the source of everything. The dark core that Alma had stolen was just a small part of this sphere. The woman told little Loretta that returning the dark core would send her back to her original timeline. When that happens, Loretta will think everything that occurred was just a dream until the next young Loretta finds her as an adult. Then she will guide the young Loretta, just like Cole's mom is doing now. After hearing this, Loretta released the dark core, which flew straight into the sphere, returning to its original position. Loretta then touched the sphere and returned to her original timeline. Her home was still an empty lot, but the dark core that caused her to time travel was gone. She would now begin the life that Cole's mom had already lived. The adult Loretta remained in front of the sphere. When she touched it, nothing happened. At that moment, the head of the research facility appeared. She said she would explain everything later. The next day, Cole woke up and in a daze, thought he saw the figure of young Loretta. When he turned on the light, he realized it was his mom. The adult Loretta had another cycle to break. If she continued to obsess over the missing Alma and neglected Cole, she would ultimately become the disappeared Alma, and her beloved son would become like her, a child who lost his mother. To break this cycle, she needed to let go of her attachment to the past and cherish son in the present. She handed Cole his favorite pine nuts and vowed to always be there for him. Cole finally felt the long-lost love of his mother. The mother and son embraced each other. Winter mornings always come slowly, but the warmth of family had already illuminated their home before the morning light. The first episode features 2 loops. One is the time travel loop. Every young Loretta will time travel and meet Cole's mom, and every Cole's mom will guide young Loretta back to her original timeline to become herself. The other is the broken loop. In all timelines, Alma becomes absorbed in her research and neglects her family, eventually disappearing and causing Loretta to grow up and neglect her son Cole in her quest to find Alma. Each young Loretta's time travel awakens middle-aged Loretta's appreciation for family, breaking the cycle of neglecting her son Cole. This act of breaking the loop itself becomes a new loop. The second episode shifts to Cole's brother, Jakob, who is a kind-hearted but shy young man. When Cole's shoelace breaks, Jakob will take off his own to give to him. The worst thing he's ever done was swapping test papers with his deskmate Danny during an exam. Danny is the complete opposite of Jakob, poor at academics but physically strong and outgoing. He embodies the high school jock that everyone remembers from their teenage years. With his good looks, Danny is always the first to catch the girl's hormone attention. Meanwhile, Jakob, the bookworm, can only silently admire his crush, May, without even the courage to say hello. In their two-person band, Danny is the lead singer. When they talk about their lives, Danny encourages Jakob to confess his feelings to May, but Jakob doesn't have the nerve. He can't understand why Danny is so popular while Danny seems indifferent to others' opinions. Danny reveals that he has accepted a job offer from the Loop and will start working there soon. He views everything else as fleeting, a quality Jakob envies. As graduation approaches, Jakob's parents want him to work at the Loop too, but Jakob dreams of becoming a painter. Like most parents, they see painting as a hobby and believe working at the Loop is the proper path. After dinner, Jakob retreats to his room, silently sketching the girl he dares not pursue, using his unacknowledged talent. The next day, Danny is painting a wall when a troubled Jakob sneaks over with cigars. Like many boys who love to daydream, they talk about superpowers in the woods. Jakob mentions that he wishes he could become an invisible man, far removed from the world, so he wouldn't have to deal with real-life problems. Little does he know that his wishful thinking will come true. While fooling around in the nearby woods, the boys discover not only an abandoned robot, but also a spherical object resembling an escape pod. Egged on by Danny, a curious Jakob opens the hatch and climbs inside. Suddenly, everything goes black and they pass out. When Danny wakes up, he's disoriented and calls out Jakob's name at the hatch. It turns out the sphere is a soul-swapping device, and Danny and Jakob have switched souls. Danny is thrilled by this turn of events, but Jakob, now in Danny's body, is panicked and cries for help in a chicken voice. Danny calms the chicken down and suggests they try the device again to swap back. After another blackout and a strange noise from the sphere, they wake up with their souls back in their original bodies. However, Danny gets a dangerous idea. He proposes that they swap bodies again to experience each other's lives. Under Danny's persuasion, the indecisive Jakob agrees, making the most regrettable decision of his life. On the street, they look at their reflections in the glass, seeing themselves in each other's bodies. Jakob's grandfather arrives, and Danny, now in Jakob's body, almost slips up, but the grandfather doesn't notice anything unusual. After he leaves, Jakob tells Danny that his grandfather is an executive at the Loop. They quickly brief each other on the essential details of their lives and officially begin living in each other's bodies. On the first day, Jakob dutifully finishes the wall painting task that Danny left unfinished. Just then, Danny's girlfriend arrives and takes Jakob by the hand, leading him to the warehouse for a tryst. As a virgin who has never experienced love, Jakob is bewildered. When he hesitates, Danny's girlfriend kisses him, sending chilling hormones down through his spine to the butt. Later, Jakob goes to Danny's home for the first time. While showering, he touches his new body, finally understanding the freedom Danny enjoys. However, he is about to experience the difficulties of Danny's life as well. Danny's sister is deaf and mute, but Jakob doesn't know sign language, making for an awkward encounter. During dinner, Danny's mom asks if he has considered working at the quarry, revealing that Danny never received a job offer from the Loop. Jakob mumbles an unclear response, and Danny's mom advises him not to be reckless, noting that their family isn't as well off as Jakob's and doesn't have as many options. Jakob spends his first night in Danny's room and is startled by Danny's pet spider crawling out from under the covers. He quickly catches it and puts it back. Downstairs, he hears Danny's parents arguing about Danny's future, realizing that Danny's life isn't as carefree as it seems. Jakob dreams of returning to his own room, but sees a stiff version of himself downstairs. The next morning, he wakes up and, forgetting about the soul swap, is startled by Danny's dad. Danny's dad drives him to school in their old car. In a corner of the school, Jakob and Danny share their experiences of living each other's lives. Encouraged by Danny, Jakob agrees to swap souls for another day. Jakob asks why Danny lied about the Loop job offer. Danny explains that he doesn't want to spend his life as a quarry worker and asks Jakob to refuse his mom next time, promising to repay him in some way. They begin their second day of soul-swapped lives. After school, Jakob continues painting the wall but accidentally sees Danny, in his body, flirting with May. He watches in horror as his own body kisses the girl he really likes, putting himself in the awkward position of being the one who cheats on himself. Furious, Jakob rushes home to find Danny. When he sees his dad, he accidentally lets something slip. Danny, enjoying Jakob's life, claims that flirting with May is his way of repaying Jakob. Jakob argues that this logic is twisted and demands they swap back immediately. However, Danny refuses, now addicted to the swap. He reveals that with Jakob's body and his grandfather's influence at the Loop, he won't have to work at the quarry. Jakob is stunned by his friend's betrayal. They start fighting, and Jakob's dad intervenes. From the old man's perspective, it's clear that Danny is bullying his son, unaware of the soul swap. He doesn't listen to Jakob's explanation and sends him away. Betrayed by his friend, losing his crush, and estranged from his father, Jakob runs to the woods with the abandoned robot and the soul-swapping device. In his frustration, he climbs into the device alone. At this moment, Danny is still unaware of the gravity of the situation. His younger brother Cole asks him for advice on drawing as usual. Since it's Jakob who can draw, Danny is clueless about art and gives Cole some vague responses. Just then, Jakob's dad comes in and mentions that Danny is missing. Danny, now determined to steal Jakob's life, feigns ignorance. He flips through Jakob's sketchbook, finding not only some risque drawings but also a portrait of May. The next day, Danny pretends everything is normal and goes to school. When his girlfriend asks about the real Danny's disappearance, he coldly pretends to know nothing. Despite trying to act indifferent, he feels a hollow ache inside. Later, Danny gives May the portrait Jakob drew, expressing Jakob's love for her. Seeing the signature on the drawing, Danny finally can't resist going to the woods to find Jakob. Panicked, he doesn't even notice the missing robot. He finds his own body collapsed inside the soul-swapping device and urgently seeks help. They rush Danny's body to the hospital, but it's too late. Jakob's soul is gone, leaving Danny's body in a vegetative state. Watching his parents by his bedside, Danny feels compelled to speak to them. They don't realize that their son's soul is in front of them. Seeing their grief, Danny is filled with regret. He tells them he's sorry things turned out this way, but lacks the courage to reveal the truth. Outside, Danny's girlfriend hugs him using her muscles, and he realizes just how loved he is. Heartbreakingly, he understands that all this love no longer belongs to him. Feeling conflicted, he returns to the soul-swapping device, hoping to fix everything. But the company, having discovered the fatal incident, has sent people to dismantle it. Danny goes to his old home, but finds the door locked and climbs in through the window. His pet spider, trapped in a box, mirrors his own situation. He decides to take the spider and bid farewell to his former life. However, his deaf-mute sister weighs heavily on his mind. Using sign language, he assures her that he is always with her. Danny then goes to Jakob's home, realizing that living in a stolen life will never bring peace. The next day, after dinner, Jakob's parents ask about his plans after graduation. Danny, in Jakob's body, says he wants to work at the Loop, easing their worries and earning their praise for finally making the right choice. Lying in bed, deep in thought, Danny hears mechanical noises outside. He goes downstairs and sees the robot from the woods. Danny realizes that Jakob, while using the soul-swapping device alone, accidentally swapped souls with the abandoned robot. Calling out Jakob's name, the robot lowers its eyes and walks away. The episode ends here. This seemingly simple yet profoundly shocking story is filled with foreshadowing. Jakob's initial wish was to gain a superpower. He wanted to be an invisible man, distant from the world. Now, in the robot's body, he has achieved that wish. Danny now has the chance to reveal the truth and potentially free Jakob from the robot's body, but he chooses not to. Torn by guilt, Danny decides to live Jakob's life despite the inner torment. At the beginning, Jakob asked Danny why he seemed indifferent to so much affection from others. The answer might be that although Danny was loved by others, he never loved himself. The third episode shifts to the unique girl May, who is often moved by the fleeting nature of time. She feels that those special moments in her life slip away too quickly. She believes she'll never recapture the initial feelings she had with her boyfriend Jakob. Her mother's gradual aging also instills a fear of time in her. In her mind, everything seems to have an expiration date. One day, while fishing at the lake with her father, she accidentally finds a device in the water that looks like a thermos. Being an engineering enthusiast, she takes it home without much thought. Before leaving, she sees a boy, Ethan, gazing lonely at the lake. At home, she takes out the device and puts on its accompanying ring, but nothing happens. Her mother then urges her to change clothes for a wedding. On the way, her parents argue over the car radio, and May realizes they no longer love each other. At the wedding, May bumps into Ethan again. He asks if she thinks the newlyweds will stay together forever, a question that has also been on her mind. They start talking, and Ethan invites her for a walk. May, looking at her indifferent parents, decides to go with him. As they walk through the woods, May notices that Ethan has a limp. Summoning the courage, she asks about his leg. Ethan explains that it's a congenital disability. May comforts him by saying that nothing in the world is perfect. Ethan looks at her meaningfully and says it would be wonderful if time could slow down, expressing his desire to hold on to the precious present moment just like May. The two of them feel a special connection, believing it to be fate. May asks to see Ethan's leg, and he agrees, exposing his vulnerability to her. Their eyes meet, and hormone sparks fly. Just then, someone comes into the forest, snapping May out of her reverie. Ethan arranges to meet her next time, and as she leaves, May keeps looking back, seeing Ethan gazing lonely into the distance, just like before. Back home, May resumes tinkering with the peculiar device, suspecting that the energy rod inside is faulty. Later, while doing her homework, her mother comes in. May asks about her parents' wedding. Her mother recalls that they married young and were happy at first, but things changed over time. The next day, May meets Ethan in a secluded spot. She asks why he is so quiet at school. Ethan reveals that he's discriminated against because of his disability. Touched, May takes his hand, but Ethan is concerned about May's boyfriend, Jakob. Noticing a construction truck nearby, May pulls Ethan to hide, then sneaks over to steal an energy rod from the truck. She acts nonchalant, but the repairman seems uneasy around her. With the energy rod, May can continue fixing the strange device. Ethan admires her technical skills and suggests visiting her room. May understands his intentions, and they go to her room. They chat, and romantic music plays as they sit closer, eventually kissing. May sits on Ethan's lap, but their intimate moment is interrupted when her mother bursts in, chasing Ethan away. May sighs and turns off the music, yearning for an uninterrupted world. May goes downstairs to continue working on the device. She installs the energy rod, puts on the ring, and flips the switch. Suddenly, everything falls silent. Panicked, she goes inside and finds her parents frozen like wax figures. The device is a time-stopping machine, halting time for everyone except the person wearing the ring. Realizing there's a pair of rings, she immediately concocts a plan. The next day, an excited May pulls Ethan into a corner, and before he knows what's happening, she slips the other ring onto his finger. She then presses the device, and time halts as she had hoped. Now, the entire world is free from interruptions. Even Jakob is frozen in place. This marks the beginning of their exclusive adventure. They shamelessly play and prank passers-by, guessing their identities. Then, they openly toast in a pub, and under the influence of alcohol, Ethan once again becomes disoriented. Yet May dodges his juicy lips, pulling him onto the street instead. Encouraged by May, Ethan removes his smelly pants, and in broad daylight, they wrestle their muscles, performing a public hormone yoga session in the middle of the street. 2 minutes later, they finish their session pretty fast as expected, and Ethan feels like it was all a dream. May tells him that from now on, every time they pass this street, they'll remember what happened pretty fast here, thus achieving the eternity they sought. They start living a wild and happy life in this frozen world. Shops are forever open to them for free, and they can live wherever they want. One day, Ethan asks May to teach him some Chinese love words. Another day, Ethan teaches May archery, promising that he will never leave her like an arrow leaving the bow. On yet another day, they ride a Tesla motorcycle at full speed, as if trying to outrun time itself. Days go by, and like every couple in the throes of early love, they leave happiness and memories in every corner of the town. Blinded by love, they think they can hide in the crevices of eternity, escaping time's reach. However, they don't realize that their passionate heartbeats are counting down to the death of their love. Living in a dreamlike state for too long, they discuss whether to restart time. May hesitates about breaking up with Jakob, which frustrates Ethan. He demands a definite answer. May quickly agrees, but when she repeatedly presses the time device, nothing happens. Ethan anxiously asks if the device is broken. May opens it and discovers the energy rod is depleted. They find the construction truck, but there are no energy rods inside. Searching the repairman's room, May finds her mother's earring and fears the worst. Opening the door, she sees her mother naked, riding the repairman treating as a Ferrari horse. Obviously, the repairman is there not to fix the machine, but her broken body. Overcome with shame and anger, May becomes even more furious when Ethan jokingly accuses the couple of infidelity, not recognizing who they are. Enraged, May throws away all their clothes. Ethan quickly goes out to console May, explaining he didn't realize the woman was her mother. But May, too angry to listen, lashes out. They have a huge fight. Ethan gives May the energy rod and walks away. May watches her mother, who now looks genuinely happy, a smile May has never seen before. Her heart softens, but when she goes outside, Ethan is already gone. She runs through the streets, calling Ethan's name, but the quiet streets offer no response. After a long time, she finally reaches the lake where she first met Ethan. He stands there just as before, gazing lonely at the water. May, crying, apologizes to Ethan, explaining that her mother's behavior deeply upset her, and Ethan's panic about the time device made her feel he didn't want to be with her. Strangely, Ethan remains silent, his back turned to her. May then realizes Ethan has removed his ring, leaving her alone in the frozen world. This means Ethan has broken their promise to never part. Heartbroken, May feels their relationship is over. She presses the device's button, restarting time. Ethan, holding the ring, attempts to speak but finally leaves without a word. This proves that eternity itself is an eternal problem. Even with time frozen, they couldn't preserve their love. Back home, May hid the device under her bed and turned off the music that she and Ethan used to listen to. After everything that had happened, she was ready to formally say goodbye to this chapter of her life. One day, May went fishing by the lake with her father. Sensing her unhappiness, he asked what was wrong. May told him she was planning to break up with her boyfriend, Jakob. Her father told her that some things are precious precisely because they are fleeting. Back home, May placed the earring she had found in the repairman's house in front of her mother and left without a word. Her mother paused in the middle of applying makeup, surprised and eager to know how her daughter learnt of her affair with the repairman who fixed not the machine, but her broken hormones. One day, May passed the street where she and Ethan had shared memories and saw him on the opposite side. She looked at him for a long time but felt nothing. It seemed that special feeling had vanished. Ethan limped over and in halting Chinese said he loved her one last time. They stood silently, then parted ways. On the bustling street corner, their love quietly faded away. This story is, in fact, a circular one. They met by the lake and ended their relationship there. They reached the peak when May caught her mother in the act and plunged to the nadir when she discovered her mother's affair. They officially got together when time was frozen and broke up when time restarted. There is another way to interpret this story. The time-stopping device can be seen as a large wedding ring. When they wore the rings, it was like making an eternal vow. Their frolics in the frozen time were akin to a honeymoon. This is why at the end of the story, May's father, who already had a strained relationship with her mother, tells her that some things are precious because they are brief. True, unchanging love and affection are priceless treasures that don't need to be discussed in terms of their value. The fourth episode tells about a child facing the death of a loved one for the first time. Russ, the head of the Loop Company, is also the beloved grandfather of Cole. One day, Cole is staying at his grandfather's house and excitedly catches a jar of fireflies. The next morning, he wakes up to find the fireflies have turned into coins. Without thinking much about it, Cole and his grandfather plant saplings in the garden. Cole asks what his grandfather does at the Loop Company. With a smile, Russ replies that he creates miracles. Later, Cole is picked up by his father, George, and before they part, grandfather and grandson play their cowboy finger gun game. As the car drives away, Russ's figure gets smaller and smaller. Back home, Russ tells his wife that Cole forgot to punch air holes in the jar, causing all the fireflies to suffocate. Not wanting to upset his grandson, Russ had secretly replaced the dead fireflies with coins during the night, turning death into a miracle. The next day, Russ goes to the Loop Company as usual. Lately, he often thinks of his wife when she was young. He then gets a call from the doctor with bad news from his last health checkup. Russ decides to find a special way to tell Cole the grim news. Russ takes Cole to the Fate Ball, which can predict lifespan. Following his grandfather's instructions, Cole speaks into the ball, producing 6 echoes ranging from youthful to aged voices. Cole asks his grandfather to try it, but this time there is no echo. Innocently, Cole asks if the Fate Ball is broken. After a moment of thought, Russ finally tells his grandson that he doesn't have much time left. Children often react to unchangeable facts with anger. Cole storms off and the family gathers at home to comfort Russ, while Cole isolates himself in his room. They all hope Russ has some miraculous technology to extend his life, but he calmly states that he will accept his fate. Still worried about Cole, Russ knocks on his door. Cole asks his grandfather to create a miracle, believing the Loop Company must have the technology to save him. Russ explains that this isn't possible. Unconvinced, Cole asks if there is an afterlife. As a man of science, Russ denies this possibility. Helping a young child accept the loss of a loved one is indeed a difficult task. The next day, Russ discussed his final arrangements with his daughter-in-law, Loretta. He expressed regret for not attending Loretta and his son's wedding years ago. He then decided to recommend Loretta as the next head of the Loop Company. After spending most of his life working tirelessly for the company and never taking a day off, Russ hoped Loretta wouldn't make the same mistake and regret dedicating too much time to work. Later, Russ picked up Cole again to give him one last lesson. They went to a dark forest, where Russ had Cole turn on a streetlight. As the light gradually dispelled the darkness, Russ told Cole that there is always light in the dark. He couldn't change the sadness Cole felt about his impending death, but he hoped Cole would find hope amid the sorrow. Before parting, the grandfather and grandson played their finger-gun cowboy game one last time. This time, Russ pretended to be knocked down and took a long time to get up. When Russ returned home, he finally couldn't hold back his tears. He wasn't afraid of dying, but regretted not spending more time with his family. That night, Russ collapsed at home. The next day, when Cole heard that his grandfather was in the hospital, he immediately pulled Danny into a rescue mission. Innocently, Cole believed the Loop Company must have something to save his grandfather. They sneaked into the company through a tunnel and made their way to the Great Dark Core. Luckily, Loretta arrived in time to stop them. Cole remembered the dark core that young Loretta had held years ago, thinking it could save his grandfather. His parents were moved by his devotion but had to tell him that nothing could change the situation. Cole then asked to visit his grandfather in the hospital. When he saw Russ, he was already delirious, lost in memories of his wife. Unable to face his grandfather like this, Cole ran out. That night, Cole returned home and tearfully confided in Danny about his helplessness. Meanwhile, Russ dreamt of himself walking towards the dark core and eventually being absorbed by it. The next day, the family received the news of Russ's passing. Loved ones form a barrier between humans and death. When they leave, we face death for the first time. A few days later, Cole attended his grandfather's funeral, acting maturely. Understanding what death meant, he returned to the fate ball and whispered, "Hello." In the echoes, he seemed to see his entire life unfold. The fifth episode tells the story of a man protecting his family. Danny's father, Ed, led a challenging life, working a repair job he didn't like. On his days off, he visited his son, who was in a vegetative state, and cared for his deaf and mute daughter. Every day, he released his frustrations through boxing and taught his daughter to box, hoping she could protect herself. Ed had a weary life without heroic dreams. His greatest wish was to safeguard his family. One day, the electrical circuit at home tripped again, and fixing it would cost a lot. His wife suggested either asking his brother for help or getting an advance on his salary. Reluctantly, Ed preferred the latter. Ed's boss was a young, successful man, while Ed was a middle-aged man just getting by. After much hesitation, Ed still couldn't bring himself to ask for the advance. That day, while on duty, Ed saw a motion capture robot. For many men, mech suits are a romantic dream, but for Ed, it was just something to envy. After work, a colleague told him there had been illegal intruders in the area recently. Ed remembered that someone had stolen Danny's things before, which made him worry about his family's safety. On the way home, Ed saw 3 big boys bullying his daughter. They hurt her knee and took her toys. When he got home, he blamed his wife for not watching their daughter carefully enough, leading to a big argument. Ed vented his frustration on a punching bag. Suddenly, the power went out again. He heard a strange noise outside and ran to check on his daughter, only to see a figure fleeing from her window. He chased after the mysterious person, but couldn't catch them. When he asked his daughter about the intruder, she claimed she didn't know. Ed called the police, reporting an intruder who seemed to be targeting his daughter. However, since there was no substantial loss or incident, the police didn't take it seriously and just promised to do their best. Feeling he couldn't even ensure his family's basic safety, Ed refused to let such a thing happen again. The next day, he mustered the courage to ask his boss for an advance and bought the robot he had seen earlier. The robot synchronized its movements with a controller, becoming Ed's promise to protect his family. Every night, Ed controlled the robot to stand guard outside the house, allowing his wife to finally sleep well. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until a coworker asked Ed what he would do if he found the intruder. Ed didn't really know. The nightly vigil was taking a toll on him. One day, while teaching his daughter how to use the robot, smoke suddenly filled the house. The electrical system had completely failed, plunging them into darkness. By candlelight, Ed and his wife discussed their dire situation. Danny's hospital bills had already strained their finances. His wife suggested selling the robot to fix the electrical system, but the robot symbolized Ed's commitment to protect his family and made him feel strong. He was reluctant to part with it. The next day, Ed wanted to take his daughter to visit her brother Danny, who was in a vegetative state due to the soul swapping with Jakob. But the girl refused to go, knowing Danny's soul wasn't really there. Suddenly, the police arrived, saying Ed's robot was scaring the neighbors. The girl controlled the robot to scare the police away, who left, warning that they would keep monitoring the robot. That night, as Ed stood guard outside, he couldn't help but doze off from exhaustion. The mysterious person took this chance to sneak up to the girl's window. It turned out to be the real Danny, inhabiting Jakob's body. Having abandoned his family to start a new life, he couldn't forget his deaf and mute sister. That day, he had punished the boys who bullied his sister and retrieved her toy, leaving it in the garage. The girl sneaked downstairs, opened the garage door, and slipped inside, waking Ed. He thought it was an intruder and rushed over with the robot to catch them in the act. His wife also ran out. Eager to prove his efforts were justified, Ed punched through the garage door with the robot. Terrified, the girl huddled in a corner. Fortunately, his wife recognized the toy and rushed in to pull their daughter out, preventing a worse disaster. The next day, Ed came home from work to find that his wife had taken the daughter and gone to stay with her brother. Ed was furious and frustrated, lifting a chair in anger but unable to bring himself to smash it. He turned to alcohol to drown his sorrows and couldn't resist calling his brother-in-law's house. His wife, however, was not willing to talk to him. That night, Ed once again took the robot and stood guard outside the house, but all he encountered were frightened neighbors and police surveillance. Looking back at his empty house, Ed finally chose to give up. The next day, he couldn't hold back his tears and cried to his comatose son, lamenting that while he had spent his life fixing things, he couldn't fix his unconscious child, but at least he could try to mend his broken family. Ed sold the robot and used the money to repair the electrical system at home. He then mustered the courage to beg his wife to return. Though his family might still be imperfect, to Ed, they remained the most beautiful thing in his life. This episode was a slow-paced tale filled with sadness and warmth. Up until now, Jakob's body still housed Danny's soul, which is why Danny didn't react strongly to Grandpa Russ's death. Danny's selfish choice had burdened his already struggling family with the costs of his care, making their lives even more difficult. Despite these hardships, Danny's parents never lost hope for life, and his sister continued to dance happily. The 6th episode tells the story of searching for true love in a parallel world. The scene shifts to Gaddis, a security guard at the Loop Company, who lived a monotonous life, with the only highlight being a photograph of an unknown pianist. Every day, he would write letters to this dream lover in the photo. He had found the picture in an old tractor that mysteriously appeared near his home one day. Gaddis tried to fix the tractor, hoping it would lead him to the pianist. Oddly, strange phenomena like twisted space black holes frequently appeared around the tractor, baffling Gaddis. Sometimes Gaddis would relax at a bar after work. One day, a stranger named Kent approached him, complaining about the bar's music, trying to find common ground. Little did he know Gaddis had chosen the music, making the situation awkward. Kent quickly made an excuse to leave. Besides the bar, Gaddis often visited the woods where he indulged in his hobby of birdwatching. Living alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, Gaddis had been single for many years and deeply yearned for love. One evening, he took out the photo of the pianist and began to pleasure himself, longing to know more about the man in his dreams. The next day, he enlisted the help of a handy repairwoman, May. Known for fixing a time-freezing device in the past, May assured him she could have the tractor working by tomorrow. Gaddis was filled with anticipation. That evening, he went to his friend Loretta's house for dinner. Gaddis shared the joys of birdwatching with them, particularly fascinated by a bird called the golden plover, which travels long distances to the Arctic to mate. He found this act of love incredibly romantic. The conversation then shifted to Gaddis's love life, where he admitted he had someone special in mind. Before leaving, Gaddis expressed his envy of Loretta's life, having someone waiting for her at home. Loretta, on the other hand, believed that being single or coupled each had its own merits and that nothing in the world was perfect. The next day, May brought the necessary parts for the tractor. She replaced the parts and started the machine, unaware that the surrounding space-time was changing. Gaddis then experienced numerous strange events. He went to his storage room, only to find everything arranged differently. Next, he cautiously peered through his front window and was shocked to see the pianist he had been dreaming of playing the piano in his house. It seems that his dream lover has been delivered to his doorstep by some magical force. Overwhelmed with disbelief, Gaddis decided to enter the house, but the person who opened the door looked exactly like him. Both stood in shock. The pianist also came out and was equally stunned. Panicking, Gaddis fled with his doppelganger chasing after him, eager to understand what was happening. They ran towards the tractor where Gaddis was finally tackled to the ground. Calming down, Gaddis realized he had entered a parallel universe, facing his parallel self. The three of them sat down and deduced that the strange events were likely linked to the tractor, presumably another creation of the Loop Company. However, in this world, the company had gone bankrupt. It wasn't clear if Gaddis could use the tractor to return to his original world. Parallel Gaddis was curious and friendly towards his counterpart, while Gaddis was fixated on Parallel Gaddis's partner, his dream pianist. Gaddis spent the night in the guest room. His dream lover was right there, yet he belonged to another version of himself. Gaddis resented his luck, wondering why he hadn't encountered such fortune. The next day, they repaired the tractor and started it again, but nothing happened. It seemed Gaddis was stuck in this world for good. Parallel Gaddis kindly invited him to stay, and Gaddis, thinking of the pianist, was more than willing. Later, Parallel Gaddis asked if he had seen the photo of the pianist in the tractor. Gaddis quickly lied, pretending he hadn't. Parallel Gaddis decided to clear out the storage room for him. While cleaning, the pianist came over to chat. Gaddis tried to hide his excitement and asked how they met. The pianist explained that he and Parallel Gaddis had gone through many hardships to be together. Gaddis felt a pang of envy, as the pianist had never appeared in his world. That night, Gaddis peered into their house and saw them getting intimate and smelly. He went downstairs to eavesdrop on their yoga session, deriving a strange thrill from this forbidden act. In his excitement, he accidentally made a noise and quickly hid. During the day, Gaddis and his parallel self got along well, bird-watching and listening to similar music. Sometimes Gaddis couldn't help but ask about their relationship, to which Parallel Gaddis responded vaguely, echoing Loretta's words that nothing is perfect. Gaddis then sought out the pianist, who kindly made him a set of wooden furniture. They shared their hobbies, and there was an unspoken attraction between them. However, during dinner, Gaddis could only watch as they displayed their affection, intensifying his loneliness against the backdrop of their happiness. The next day, while writing a love letter, Parallel Gaddis burst in, informing him that they were having guests over and asked Gaddis to stay in the workshop. Though annoyed, Gaddis had no choice but to comply. That evening, isolated in the workshop, he watched as the others enjoyed the gathering. Suddenly, the pianist brought him some food, confessing that he was fickle and didn't enjoy socializing after the initial excitement wore off. Gaddis, ever curious about their relationship, engaged the pianist in conversation. Their eyes met and sparks flew, leading to a tongue massage. Fortunately, the pianist stopped himself and quickly left. The kiss from the previous night only heightened Gaddis's desire for the pianist. Today, with his parallel self out of the house, Gaddis's thoughts turned wicked. Anxiously, he approached the pianist's room, and to his surprise, the pianist had the same idea. As Gaddis undid his belt to flex his thing, he knew he was betraying his parallel self. That night, Gaddis witnessed the pianist and his parallel self in a heated argument. The next day, Gaddis asked his parallel self about the fight, but his response was vague, suggesting that Gaddis would understand in time that nothing is perfect. As days passed, Gaddis's feelings for the pianist grew stronger. Having been intimate with the pianist once and seeing his parallel self not valuing his dream lover, Gaddis felt he had a chance. He believed that if the pianist could love Parallel Gaddis, he could love him too, since they were almost the same person. However, he kept these thoughts confined to his notebook. One stormy night, as rain leaked into his storage room, Gaddis's yearning overflowed like the rainwater he collected in a bucket. Unable to contain himself, he braved the storm and handed his notebook to the pianist, expressing his willingness to wait for him. Returning to his room, he felt a mix of joy and admiration for his own courage, believing a blissful life with the pianist was imminent. But as he listened to the rain, no response came from the house across the way. The next day, it was Parallel Gaddis who appeared, looking stern. He knew everything. Torn between his fondness for Gaddis and his anger at Gaddis's betrayal, Parallel Gaddis didn't know what to do. Gaddis, on the other hand, felt his parallel self didn't deserve the pianist's love. Parallel Gaddis revealed that the pianist had a habit of seeking out new romances and that their affair meant nothing to him. They had fought about this many times. Once again, Parallel Gaddis reminded him that nothing is perfect. Despite Gaddis's betrayal, Parallel Gaddis still considered him a friend and wanted him to stay. However, Gaddis couldn't bear to watch his dream lover and his parallel self flaunt their happiness any longer. Ignoring his pleas, Gaddis decided to leave. Before leaving, Gaddis took one last look at the pianist and then walked away. In the woods, he buried his notebook, symbolically ending his past feelings. This parallel world, both familiar and strange, had exhausted him. Finally, he reached a restaurant and asked the owner for a glass of water, having no money. To his surprise, the parallel world's Kent appeared and struck up a conversation. It turns out Kent was searching for a bird rumored to be extinct. This shared passion sparked a connection between them. As night fell, their budding romance began to bloom. In this episode, Gaddis's connection with birds hinted at his fate. His mention of the golden plover at Loretta's house paralleled his own quest for love in the parallel world. Kent's search for an extinct bird mirrored Gaddis's belief that love was dead, but Kent's determination rekindled Gaddis's hope for love, allowing their romance to blossom. Kent and Gaddis's differing musical tastes underscored the recurring theme that nothing is perfect. Their shared love for birdwatching, however, was a precious common ground. Sometimes, focusing too much on flaws can make one miss rare opportunities. The pianist's inability to remain faithful was a major issue, highlighting that Kent was a better match for the sensitive Gaddis. This episode illustrated that letting go of obsessions can lead to happiness. The 7th episode tells the story of a monster stranded on a deserted island. Back in the day, George was just a teenager. Like most teens, he often got into trouble with his two best friends. Their curiosity made them both daring and cruel. Sometimes they would watch horror movies together from Daniel CC Movie Channel, like the one about a monster on a deserted island. After the movie, they would privately mock those fools who watched it with them. At times, they would flip over rocks to find snakes and cruelly kill them with electric prods, then scare each other with the dead snakes. Like all reckless youths, it was only a matter of time before they got into serious trouble. George had secretly built a radio that often picked up strange, monstrous roars. Unbeknownst to him, these sounds came from a real monster, one with which he had a deep connection. Perhaps influenced by the horror movies, while chatting at the harbor one day, they discussed the legend of a monster on the island across the bay. The monster was said to be enormous, with sharp teeth and claws. According to the adults, the monster was created long ago by the Loop Company. After it brutally killed humans, it was subdued and exiled to the island. George remembered his father's stern warnings to never go to the island. However, his friends wanted to prank him and deliberately taunted him. Torn between pride and curiosity, George decided to join them on their exploration, not knowing this decision would change his life forever. They boarded a speedboat and quickly reached the island. On the shore, they found a broken dinghy, which they guessed was used to transport the monster back in the day. George's friends didn't care about the monster. Their goal was to prank George. They deliberately sent George into the woods to investigate. Trusting and naive, George ventured into the forest. Trees were adorned with warning stones. Just then, he heard the speedboat engine start. Turning around, he saw his friends leaving, laughing, and ignoring his desperate calls for help. They had no idea this prank would alter George's life. George waited alone for a long time, but his friends never returned. Instead, he heard the same monstrous roars he had picked up on his radio coming from the woods. Drawn by curiosity, George was startled when a sea snake bit his left arm. In great pain, he hastily treated his wound. Realizing no one would come for him anytime soon, George grabbed the electric prod his friends left behind and ventured into the forest alone. To his surprise, the forest showed signs of life. There were primitive alarm systems on the ground and large claw marks on the trees. Following the tracks deeper into the forest, George stumbled upon a primitive campsite. Terrified, he ran away. Soon darkness fell and a sudden storm erupted. With his arm throbbing in pain, George took shelter in a fallen tree trunk, waiting for the storm to pass. The scene shifts, and George wakes up in his own room. He sees ants swarming all over the windowsill. But this is just a dream born from his longing to be home. In reality, he is still on the deserted island, and his arm wound is crawling with ants, oozing pus. Terrified, George brushes them off, but in his panic, he leaves his electric prod behind in the tree trunk. Hearing a noise again, George retraces his steps back to the campsite, only to find it deserted. Someone had lit a fire, and the cold and injured George reached out to warm his hands. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared in the distance, slowly approaching with a terrifying roar. George quickly fled for his shitty life, triggering a trap laid by who knows whom. George struggled to free himself from the trap and lay flat on the ground, holding his breath to avoid detection. The armor-clad monster walked past without noticing him. Once the creature was gone, George ran back to the tree trunk where he had sheltered from the rain, trembling with fear. He then heard his friends calling out to him. He wanted to respond, but the monster was patrolling nearby. George was extremely anxious, waiting for the monster to leave before crawling out. However, the monster was still lurking nearby. In a desperate move, George used the electric prod to jab at it, managing to sever one of the creature's arms. Seizing the opportunity, George ran to the shore, shouting for help, just as the speedboat was passing by. He fainted from exhaustion and fear, but fortunately, the speedboat turned back, and George was finally rescued. George was taken to the town hospital where his left arm, severely infected, had to be amputated. His friend's prank had left George disabled. His mother hugged him, heartbroken. This incident left a deep scar on his psyche. After returning home, he couldn't shake off the memories of the island monster and would often try to pick up its roars on his radio. He never played with those two friends again, avoiding them whenever he saw them. One day, his busy father finally came home and found him. The father told George to keep everything about the island a secret and never to reveal what he had seen to anyone. His father seemed more concerned about the island monster than George's injury. Later, his parents took him to a clinic in their miraculous little town, where he was fitted with a mechanical prosthetic arm. This amazing town seemed to have everything. The prosthetic arm allowed George to return to a normal life, shedding the identity of a disabled person. He could go to school, read and write just like everyone else. However, sometimes thoughtless classmates would show impolite curiosity about his mechanical arm. Every night, George would carefully place his prosthetic arm aside and often think about the island monster. The monster had lost an arm to his electric prod, and now he too was missing an arm. As George grew up, he married Loretta and became the father of Cole and Jakob. The mechanical prosthetic he got in his youth stayed with him into middle age. The shadow of the island monster seemed to have faded away, but a series of events hinted that his connection with the monster was not yet over. First, Loretta told George that he had talked in his sleep again, saying terrifying things. George had promised his father to keep the secret, so he never told Loretta about the incident. After Loretta left, he heard a familiar noise. It was Cole playing with the electric prod George had used as a boy. George quickly confiscated it, noticing how much his son resembled his younger self in his mischievousness. Next, George's mechanical arm malfunctioned, so he went to the clinic for repairs. The staff recommended an upgraded prosthetic, but George preferred his old one. That evening, the TV was coincidentally airing a rerun of the movie Island Monster, which he and his childhood friends had watched together. Despite the years, he could not forget the monster he encountered on the island. The day's events felt like omens, as if the monster was calling to him from the distant island. Uneasy, George lay in bed that night, unable to sleep. He decided to take action and retrieved his old radio from the storage room. After some adjustments, the radio indeed picked up the monster's roars, suggesting that the island monster was still alive after more than 20 years. The next day, George returned to the familiar harbor and sighed, deciding to confront his past and uncover the truth about the monster. He first needed to learn its origin, so he visited his mother. His father had passed away, leaving her as the only one who knew the truth. After some small talk, George got to the point. His mother tried to change the subject, but under George's persistent questioning, she finally revealed the truth. The monster was actually his father Russ's creation. Russ, who worked for the Loop Company, had created the first generation of AI robots. This robot was an unfinished prototype with emotions and was feared by the townspeople because of its human-like appearance. To protect it from human attacks, Russ exiled it to the island, where it lived in solitude for many years, never harming anyone. The town's tales of the island monster were baseless rumors. George's nightmares were about a lonely robot. Understanding the truth, George no longer felt afraid. He returned to the island alone. The claw marks on the trees and the fallen tree trunk were unchanged after all these years. After walking for a while, he reached the primitive campsite again. As he approached the campfire, he heard a noise. The robot emerged from the darkness, roaring as if it recognized George. Ignoring whether the robot could understand him, George recounted his father's creation of it. The robot seemed to remember arriving on the island alone years ago. Its old blanket was now tattered, but it still wore it. George apologized for disarming the robot years ago. The robot roared like a goose in anger, but George calmed it down and set aside the electric prod. He then removed his mechanical prosthetic. The robot, now missing an arm, and George, with his missing arm, looked at each other. The prosthetic arm on the ground glimmered in the flickering firelight. This episode follows the classic adventure trope of uncovering a monster's true identity. In many monster stories, the supposedly fearsome creature turns out to be a pitiable being with a touching past. This theme is evident in movies like Edward Scissorhands. Here, the monster is revealed to be an emotionally capable robot, adding a layer of human warmth to the tale. George lost his arm due to human malice, and the monster lost its arm because of George's primal instincts. Decades later, George finally made amends with kindness. The 8th episode tells a touching story about the passage of time. It takes place several years later. Danny's soul is still inhabiting Jakob's body, and he has finally achieved his dream of becoming an employee at Loop Company. Meanwhile, Cole has moved up to middle school. One day at school, Cole meets a teacher who seems to sense that something is troubling him. The teacher encourages Cole to share what's on his mind. It turns out that Cole feels lonely after his brother Jakob left home. Even now, Cole still sets an extra place at the dinner table out of habit. During dinner, he asks his parents if he can call his brother, but they insist that his brother needs more space to be independent. Confused, Cole asks why things can't stay the way they were. Loretta comforts her younger son, assuring him that she will always be there for him. Cole couldn't have imagined how quickly this promise would be fulfilled. At that moment, he was still lost in his own small worries. After dinner, he secretly calls his brother but gets no answer. The next day, his grandmother takes him out for some photography to help ease his worries. She tells him that if he wants to remember something, he should just take a picture of it. Pointing to a distant round tower, she mentions seeing someone climb it a few days ago. Since Grandpa Russ passed away, Grandma has been living alone and understands how Cole feels. Back home, Cole receives a call back from his brother. He wants to visit, but his brother keeps postponing, saying he'll be free next week. That night, a dejected Cole picks up a book his teacher lent him to pass the long hours. As Loretta enters the room, she flips open the book and finds an old library card inside. It turns out that Loretta had borrowed the same book many years ago, and looking at it now, she is filled with nostalgia as decades have flown by. She looks into Cole's eyes and expresses her love sincerely, but Cole is too absorbed in missing his brother to really hear her. The next day, Cole goes to his brother's apartment building, using the excuse of delivering something to visit him. His brother reluctantly sends away the girl he was with and lets Cole in. He seems uneasy and in a hurry to get to work, as if he doesn't really want to see Cole. After a series of probing questions from Cole, his brother finally breaks down and confesses everything. He reveals that he is actually Danny. Years ago, in pursuit of a better life, Danny swapped bodies with Cole's brother Jakob and selfishly refused to switch back. Now Danny realizes that this life isn't what he wanted. He hands Cole a drawing of the robot that holds Jakob's soul and expresses his deep regret. Perhaps only a child could accept such an absurd truth. Angry, Cole leaves. He heads to Loop Company to talk to his mother Loretta, but the security guard informs him that Loretta is in the city for work. Knowing that Jakob has been living alone in the woods all this time makes Cole feel terrible. He decides to find him. Using the drawing as a guide, he ventures into the woods and calls out for his brother. When Jakob appears, Cole needs to confirm that the robot in front of him is indeed his brother. He kicks a soccer ball to the robot, and through their familiar passing game, he confirms that it is his brother. Cole then starts sharing updates about his life with Jakob, but the robot listens silently and communicates through gestures. Jakob shakes his head, indicating that he doesn't hold any grudge against Danny. Cole, eager to return Jakob to his former self, decides they should go through the woods to the city to find their mother. On their summer journey, the two brothers unexpectedly came across a frozen river. Though puzzled, they didn't think much of it and crossed over. As night fell, Cole grew tired and lay down to sleep. Jakob stood guard, cautiously surveying the area as if sensing some danger nearby. Soon after, they both drifted into sleep. The next day, the brothers continued through the woods. Suddenly, a wild robot appeared and attacked. Sensing its malicious intent, Jakob quickly moved to shield Cole. The two robots engaged in combat and Cole hid. Using the unique human trait of strategy, Jakob targeted the opponent's lower body, toppling it to the ground with a few swift moves. A final stomp rendered the robot motionless. Still upset, Cole kicked the fallen robot a couple of times before they resumed their journey. But Cole didn't know Jakob had been damaged in the fight. Nonetheless, Jakob limped along, following Cole. Soon, they encountered a fallen tree blocking their path. Cole easily crawled under it, but Jakob, with his damaged body, couldn't lift his leg over. Hearing the noise behind him, Cole turned around to see Jakob's body split in two as he struggled to climb over the tree. Jakob's soul faded away into the cold machinery under the sunlight. They were just a step away from the city where their mother Loretta was working. Cole was heartbroken and fell asleep without realizing it. In his dream, he saw Jakob's soul walking into the woods. When he woke up, he knew his brother was gone. He picked up his favorite pine cone and placed it near Jakob's remains, a simple yet touching farewell from a boy to his brother. Since Jakob was no longer there, Cole decided to return the way they came. The frozen river they had crossed was now flowing freely. Strangely, when Cole threw a soccer ball into the water, it disappeared downstream and then reappeared upstream. Preoccupied with thoughts of his brother, Cole crossed the river again without giving it much thought. Looking back, he saw the river freeze over once more. He didn't realize that the flowing water represented the passage of decades. Cole just wanted to tell everyone what had happened. He arrived at Danny's building, which looked familiar but strangely different. He shouted Danny's name but received no response. Then he went to the Loop Company and asked the security guard to call Loretta. Soon, Loretta appeared, now wearing reading glasses and with a mix of black and white hair. Despite the changes, Cole recognized his mother immediately. Loretta, seemingly out of context, told Cole that she had kept her promise to be with him all his life. Cole tried to explain what had happened to Jakob, but Loretta already knew. It turned out that when Cole crossed the river, decades had rushed by. Many things had changed. Danny had confessed his selfish actions to Loretta, and they had found Jakob's robot remains. Loretta had lost both her sons and cried herself to sleep every night. They didn't pursue Danny, but they also didn't forgive him. Loretta and George supported each other through the years. During this time, their grandma had also passed away due to illness. Loretta and George remained together, and eventually, George too passed away. Loretta held on to her promise to Cole and endured many more years. On this day, she received a call from the security guard and saw Cole again. Decades had passed and she had grown old, but young Cole, still as innocent as ever, had returned. The time river in the woods, once crossed during its thaw, had fast-forwarded time by decades. Over these years, some things had changed, while others had remained the same. One day, Cole was playing soccer when a middle-aged man appeared. It was Danny, all grown up. Summoning his courage, Danny asked about Jakob. Cole reassured him that his brother never blamed him. Danny was finally at peace after years of torment. Danny then introduced his daughter to Cole. Despite the age difference, they connected effortlessly. Danny exchanged a knowing glance with Loretta upstairs, and by a twist of fate, their next generation became friends. Cole finished reading the book his teacher had lent him and returned it at school. Surprisingly, despite the passing decades, the teacher's appearance hadn't changed at all. She then revealed a startling truth to Cole. She wasn't just his teacher, but had also taught Jakob, Loretta, and George. It turned out the teacher was actually the second generation of AI robots created by Grandpa Russ. This was why she could transcend time. The teacher removed her facade to show Cole her mechanical core. Inspired by her unchanging face, Cole went home and dug out his camera. He remembered his grandma's advice to take pictures of anything he wanted to keep. So he decided to take a photo of his old mother, his only remaining family in the world. When Loretta learned the reason, she was overwhelmed with emotions from the past decades and couldn't hold back her tears. Cole continued to photograph everything he wanted to remember. He recalled his grandma mentioning seeing someone climbing the tower. In her memory, Cole decided to climb it too. However, the tower held its own secrets. From the top, he saw his future self, now middle-aged, returning to their old home with his wife and children. Young Cole, transcending time, captured this moment of his future self. This episode also tied up loose ends from previous episodes. In the first episode, Loretta promised to be a good mother, and in this episode, she waited for her son for decades. The body swap between Danny and Jakob from the second episode was finally revealed. The fourth episode hinted at Cole's future, including the scene of middle-aged Cole returning to the old home with his family, which was shown in this episode's ending. Grandpa's promise of creating more human-like robots from the seventh episode came true with the teacher in the final episode. The entire season's narrative came full circle in this final episode. It was filled with a gentle melancholy that was deeply moving, much like life itself, imbued with a sense of inevitable loneliness. In reality, we all encounter difficult times and have some unpleasant memories. Hopefully, we can all be like Cole at the end, making peace with our heartbreak and reconciling with our past selves. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.